Hello! It's time to start working on the miniature tap for this little sink from my Dollhouse kitchen for my apartment, which is 12th scale in a converted warehouse with an art gallery on the bottom floor and an apartment above. So in the last video I made the miniature sink, and in this video I'm going to be showing you one attempt at making a miniature tap which didn't go to plan, and then I'm going to be showing you the second attempt at making the miniature tap, which I'm really pleased with. So I am going to really quickly show you the first attempt that didn't go to plan. I have a little tub of tiny little jewellery findings, beads and pieces of old jewellery. These are the split pins that I used for the handles on my miniature kitchen cabinets. So I decided to try and make the tap out of all of these components. So I'm going to show you the tap and I'm going to talk through how I made it. So I started by using a little plastic tube, which was actually the cover of the bristles on a paintbrush. So this was the centre section here. When I used super glue on it, a reaction happened and it basically melted the plastic. At first the plastic kept its shape, but I could see that the glue had gone inside the tube and it wasn't setting, and it looked like a little lava lamp. But when I came to this the next morning, it had set, but it had reshaped all of the plastic, as you can see, so I think a chemical reaction had happened. So because the super glue wouldn't dry on the plastic, I had slotted some little metal rings from a bracelet around the tube and added a bead at the end here because the metal would stick with the super glue. And I then did work on this little tap a little bit longer to try and make it look as if it was made out of metal. And I will talk to you a little bit later in the video about how I did that. But as you can see, the shape of the tap just wasn't right. It was completely the wrong shape from where the plastic straw had reacted with the super glue, and all of the metal rings that I'd used at the top weren't really lying at the right angle, so it was all bumpy. So I decided to remake this tap, keeping the elements that I liked from the first tap, but changing the way I made the main section of the tap. So this little clasp is for bracelet making, and I thought that it made the perfect base to the tap and also the little faucet section. So I removed the little hook that was on the end of each piece. Ready to use these for my next tap. And once again I planned on using the tiny little press studs as the handles for the taps. For the main section of the tap, I decided to try using Milliput, which is something that I've not tried using before. I've had these tubes of Milliput in my cupboard for quite a long time because it was recommended to me quite a long time ago, but I've just not had a reason to use it yet. So basically it comes in two tubes and it looks a little bit like modelling clay, and you mix the two tubes together when you're ready to use it and it starts to cure when they're mixed. The instructions said to wear gloves, and there was a warning on the box saying that this could cause allergic reactions. So I popped the gloves on. As you may be able to see whilst I'm working on this, these gloves were far too big for me, and it did make everything just that little bit harder. But it's important to follow the safety information that's given on the packaging. So I cut the Milliput with my little clay knife, and I cut equal parts of each tube of Milliput. And then I kneaded them together. And I kneaded them together for about 5 minutes. The Milliput had the consistency of polymer clay after it had been conditioned, so it was quite nice to work with because it wasn't really soft, but it also wasn't very difficult to mould. So I started by rolling the Milliput and creating a tap shape, but I'd forgotten that I wanted to attach this piece to the end. Now, I didn't just want to glue this because I wanted some of this Milliput to cover the narrower piece of the jewellery finding. So as I attached this, I did end up losing some of the shape of the tap that I'd just created. So I decided to roll it again. So I doubled the Milliput back over and then I rolled it out so that it was all the same thickness. The piece of plastic that I'm using to roll here is actually just one of the dividers in my plastic container that I keep my beads in, but it works really well for rolling out clay like this. For the little metal jewellery finding that was going to go at the other end of the tap, I decided that I would stick that on at the end because I didn't need any of the Milliput to cover any of it. I also made this extra piece to use with the handles. And I used my clay moulding tools just to try and smoothen the edges and to help these pieces to join together. However, when I tried to push these little press studs into the Milliput, unfortunately it squashed the Milliput out of shape. So I actually decided to remove these two handles so that I could shape them separately whilst they weren't attached to the main tap, and I decided that when they were dry I would try and reattach them with glue. So I just made sure that this little tap was at the right angle whilst it dried, and I was being really careful here not to squash it down onto the surface that I was working on because I didn't want it to be flat on the other side. And then I left these pieces to cure. So the instructions say that they take about 4 hours to cure. I left them overnight and the next morning they were all set and ready to continue working on. My first task was to trim these handles down a little bit. I've never worked with Milliput before, so I wasn't sure how easy it would be to cut through it. Unfortunately, the little handle actually snapped off away from the press stud, just leaving the tiniest bit of Milliput in place. But actually, when I held it up against the main section of the tap, I thought that it still looked alright, so I decided to snap the other tap handle off as well at the same point. Now this was my first attempt at a miniature tap, and it was time to try and make my second attempt look as if it was made out of metal. I was experimenting with different materials, and whilst I tried to read up on the health and safety behind all of these materials, I couldn't find the full details of how they interact with one another. And as we've seen with the super glue earlier in the video, it interacted really badly with the plastic tubing. So I don't want to go into details of the materials I'm using here because I don't have the full knowledge from a health and safety perspective. So I don't want anybody to copy my techniques here, just in case any of the materials that I'm using aren't meant to be used together. So please don't copy any of my techniques. From a health and safety perspective, it'd be really interesting to know if there's anything like a website that we can refer to and type in different ingredients and different materials to see if it is safe to use them together. Because it's always really important to stay safe whilst crafting. Please do let me know if you are aware of any websites like that where we can look up different ingredients or different materials just to check that they're safe to use, or to check whether there are any additional health and safety measures that we're meant to put in place. Because obviously for some materials we should be using ventilated rooms or wearing gloves. So it's good to know these things, and sometimes if you can't find a way that a material reacts with a different specific material, it would be really helpful to have a website where you can kind of search each material and see if it's safe to use together. Please do let me know if there's anything like that anyone's aware of. I am sorry to mention health and safety so often in my videos, but I'm not an expert, and I don't know, I just want to make sure that everybody knows not to copy me, because this is just a hobby for me and it's just a diary entry, definitely not a tutorial. So yeah, please don't copy any of my methods or techniques. And if you are working on any craft projects, always do make sure that you follow all of the information and advice and warnings on the packaging from the manufacturers of the materials that you're using. Anyway, back to this tap. So I tried to stick the handles of the tap down with super glue, but once again they just wouldn't stick. So there was obviously a surface here that I wasn't meant to be using the super glue with. I just wasn't quite sure which surface it was. You may have noticed that this tap was a different colour from my first attempt. That was because I was concerned that a gold tap would kind of camouflage in with the sink that I'd already made. But when I held this tap in place, I changed my mind and thought actually I think it would look better if the tap looked like it was a brass tap. So I started to change the colour of the tap. You might have noticed in the background that I'm using some eyeshadow. That eyeshadow is only ever used for crafts, it's never used as makeup. I added a different colour of eyeshadow to try and give a tarnished effect to the metal. And I repeated this with the miniature handles so that they match the tap. I used my little clay cutter to trim the top of this tap away, so even though the Milliput had cured, I could still slice through it. And this gave me a nice flat edge to attach the little metal component to that was from the bracelet clasp. Now I knew that the super glue wasn't really working to stick things to the main part of the tap, so I swapped to this Yoo-hoo glue in the hope that this might work instead. And thankfully, it worked really well. Now unfortunately I couldn't attach the handles with the same glue because the area where I wanted to attach the handles already had some super glue residue left over on it, which was dry, but it was still there. Now when I'd had my first attempt at making the tap, I had tried switching to the other Yoo-hoo glue, but when I put it on top of the area that had the super glue on it, a reaction happened then and it started to almost look like soap. So I don't know what was happening, but I knew not to put both glues together. So instead, I attached some little metal rings that had come from a bracelet around the section of the tap where the handles would go. Because these didn't need sticking down, I just used the pliers to squeeze them into place. And I hoped that the metal would allow the super glue to stick. So I was sticking the metal part that was exposed on the handle to the metal hoops that I'd just added around the main part of the tap. And I used the super glue for this, and this worked. I was really pleased with how my little tap looked. So this is the comparison side by side of my two attempts, and I think it's actually really lovely to look and see the progress that I made from the start of the video. And I think it's good to look back at this actually and think it's alright for things to not quite work out the first time, because I learned a lot from the first attempt. I learned not to combine the super glue with the plastic and the Yoo-hoo glue of the other type. They were both Yoo-hoo glues, but yeah, two different types. I learned that the little press studs did look nice as handles and the little bracelet clasps as well. And it also gave me the opportunity to have a practice with Milliput, which I've never used before. So to attach this in place, I could have just glued it down, but the base of the jewellery finding that I'd used at the bottom of the tap had a narrower end at the bottom. So I wanted the narrow end to go into the worktop, just like this. So I used my pin drill, which is one of my favourite tools from our miniature toolbox. And I just drilled a hole in place here and gently popped the tap into position. I realised that I hadn't actually done anything with this little plug. I was going to try and make it match the tap. But actually, let me know what you think in the comments please, because I might leave it as a silver plug that doesn't match so that it's more visible. But if you think I should turn it into the sort of goldy colour that the tap is to match the tap, please do let me know. I repositioned the tap a little bit. It was leaning backwards because I think I might have drilled the hole just at a little bit of an angle. Please do let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a lovely day. Bye!